Alright, so chapter 8 starts out and Mamachi's playing the violin and she's reflecting back to her feelings about Chaco. She hopes that when Margaret's there, she's not going to sleep with Chaco. And she talks about how she put all of her love into her son because he stood up for her against her husband when he was beating her. And she's got all these scars on her head from all the beatings. And it's kind of weird how she treats the women that Chaco's had relationships with. She actually built a door out on the side so that he can have secret relationships with women without everybody else knowing about it. But she treats them like whores. She gives them money when they leave, so it's not like Chaco's has a real relationship with them. This is a man's needs, and these are just whores that are going to fulfill those needs for a short time. That's all I got right now.
Chapter 8 goes on to continue describing how everyone gets ready for Sophie Mall's arrival. Coach Maria is icing a giant cake that says, "Welcome home, Sophie Mall," and it describes her looks, saying that she looks like a bottled fetus and has fingers that are thick like sausages. She doesn't wear saris despite being a Syrian Christian, and instead she wears big gold hoop earrings to show that she is part of the touchable class and higher class, even though she is just a cook for the family. It goes on to describe how she grows to become a TV addict, becoming addicted to watching people like Hulk Hogan and getting insight into the American culture.
That they were like in love with each other, but it was just like children being children. Like he would give her gifts that he would handcraft himself.
Yeah.
And he'd hold them out like or on his palm so that she wouldn't have to touch him. But they always had like this little friendship when they were kids. But the moment where Rahel is in Velutha's arms and Amu and Velutha like meet eyes, that's the beginning of their true love affair, where they realize that it's a possibility to like be with each other.
After they have made their cake and Sophie comes with her mother Margaret, and Rahel treats everybody like they're in a play and they're an actor, and Rahel is no one. She's just a townsperson because nobody's paying attention to her. They're all Sophie Mall, and Isa's not present, and that's when she leaves the play to go see Velutha when he appears. And after Amu and Velutha have their moment, baby Kojima sees Velutha and is convinced that he was there, so she's gonna get her revenge. She vows it somehow. So that's the end of chapter 8.
Chapter 9. So Rahel's back in 1993 and she's staring out the window, and it's the first night that it hasn't rained since she's been there. And baby Kochama is asking her, what are your plans? What are your plans with Esta? And she doesn't know. Like, she has no idea what her plans are. So she starts reflecting back to 1969. And she remembers 1 week before Sophie's death, and 1 week after she arrived, 1 week before Sophie's death, she remembers that Sophie kind of exceeded the twins' expectations. She was a complete brat. She told her dad that she didn't love him as much as she loved Joe. She was rude to Mamachi and baby Kochama. Rahel remembers when they were playing, they wore Amu's makeup, they put like makeup all over their eyes so they looked like little raccoons, and they were dressed up in their saris and went to go play with Velutha. And he let them live out this little fantasy, and he treated them like little ladies, and she thinks that was very important for them to just be children and play out their fantasy. And Rahel also recalls the counseling that her and Esta received after the events happened in the story, and she remembers being told that they weren't victims. Like her and Esta, Rahel also recalls the counseling that her and her brother received after all the events happened, after Sophie died, after Velutha died, and they were told that they were victims. But she knows that's not true. She knows that her and Esta, while they were the perpetrators too, they weren't the only ones involved. But she remembers that there was only one victim, and that was Velutha.
Chapter 10 goes back to 1969 on the day before Sophie Mull arrives. Esta tries to escape the house because there's so much going on with people picking out their outfits and getting the house ready. So he goes to the pickle factory and sits there to think. He starts to think about the orange drink, lemon drink man and how he could walk into the factory at any time. And he also thinks to himself that if he did, then Amy would offer him a piece of cake and probably something to drink because just nobody knew what had happened. This leads to him thinking two thoughts. A, being that anything can happen to anyone, and B, that it is best to be prepared. Rahel enters the factory and starts questioning Esta and what he's doing. This leads him to tell her about his two thoughts and to decide that they're going to go to the history house. They decide later to meet at the mangosteen tree, and there they find a boat covered in moss, which happens to be the boat that Amy uses to cross the river to meet Velutha. They learn that there's 3 parts of the river. One of them is calm and swimmable, the second part is deep with wild currents, and third is calm, meaning that there's not very many parts where they could swim safely. They carry the boat to Velutha's hut, and he isn't there, but Cutapin, his paralyzed brother, is. Velutha comes in later after they talk to Cutapin a little bit and says could probably fix the boat after they ask, but he doesn't want the kids playing in the water. They leave, and Cutapin asks Velutha if the kids had said anything about him seeing him in the march, and Velutha says that they hadn't, but he knows that they know that it was him.
Chapter 11 is still 1869. They're still kids, and it takes place where Amy was still sleeping. It's in the afternoon, and she's having this dream about this one-armed man, and they're swimming. And she's in this half-asleep world where she knows her children are watching her. So they're sort of in the dream, but they're not really there. She can't interact. And the twins, Rahel and Esta, don't want to wake her with it because they're afraid if they just wake her, she'll have a heart attack. So they go around and they calmly wake her, like whispering and rattling things around. And when she awakes, finally, Issa says that she was having a daymare, and why was she so sad? And Emma realizes she wasn't sad, she was really happy with the god of small things. And they talk, so they're sit on the bed and they talk about stretch marks where they had been in the belly, and Emma gets tired and goes and locks herself in the bathroom and starts thinking about her life, like looking at herself and saying she's already lived her life. And it goes on to say that while she's thinking about this, it goes into a futuristic think of how 4 days after Sophie Mull's death, Chaka's going to kick him out, and Ethan's got to pack all his things to move. And then it goes further in time, saying where Rahel was watching the silent stranger of Issa bathing himself in the same room that he was leaving. So that was the end of chapter 11.
Chapter 12 starts out in 1993. The twins are older, and they are both back. It starts out with Rahel headed towards the temple to see the elephant. She's bringing a coconut to the elephant, Kochutambin, which is the name of the chapter. When she gets there, she realizes the elephant has aged, which reminds her that she has aged. As the story goes on, she stays to watch a performance of the dancers, and she gets in a trance during the story. And the story is all about betrayal and a family and violence and love. And during the story, she senses something, and it's Esta. He comes to the temple as well, and they sit separately, but throughout the whole story, they're connected. And I think during the story, they realize how much the story resembles their own life, with the betrayal in their family and the violence. I think this connects them even more. They are brought out of this trance when they start hearing a noise, and it's the elephant that woke up, and it starts to gnaw on the coconut. The thing about these performances is that they could last a really long time. They normally went all night into the next morning, and so Esther and Rahel are there a long time. Finally, the dancers slow down and they decide to go home. These traditions used to be a really big part of Indian culture, but as the narrator tells us, these traditions have been cheapened by the tourists and the business, and so they aren't as important to Indian culture as they used to be. When Esther and Rahel are about to leave, they end up running into Comrade Pilali, and this is the man that introduced them to this temple and to the traditions and to the stories. And he is so happy to see that they're still interested in Indian culture and to see that they still appreciate it. They all leave together, but they leave in silence. The chapter actually ends with the line, he and she, we and us, and they walk all the way home without saying one word.
Our close reading comes from chapter 8 in the context of Amy watching Rahel and Velutha play after everyone is watching Sophie Mull play after she arrives. So suddenly Amy hoped that it had been him that Rahel saw on the march. She hoped it had been him that had raised his flag and knotted arm in anger. She hoped that under his careful cloak of cheerfulness he housed a living, breathing anger against the smug, ordered world that she so raged against. She hoped it had been him. She was surprised at the extent of her daughter's physical ease with him, surprised that her child seemed to have a subworld that excluded her entirely. And we chose this passage because Emu seems to be really alienated from everyone else and really isolated from them. Like, for instance, she doesn't connect with her family at all. Like, she doesn't agree with her family's values, and the twins are so connected with each other that there's no room for her to be a part of that. And she really just loves Emu and wants to be able to connect with him and share the anger that they have against society that won't let them be in love with each other.